Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to come to talk here. First of all, I want to congratulate all of the artists and curators and organizers of this event. I think that you are doing really great work that has impact beyond Norway. I come from Rovaniemi, from Finland, and we are really following what goes on here in Northern Norway and in the contemporary crafts, art, and through the very valuable work that the associations are doing here. So indeed, I'm a teacher in the university, and I'm teaching in the International Master's Program Arctic Art and Design, where we are also educating future artists to work along community arts and in the environmental art methods, and very often also within the pedagogical turn. So my background is in the art education. And there's a Rovaniemi in the map. It's not so far from here, so happy to be here. Yes. And within the artistic research nowadays, there are many artist researchers who combine artist research and teaching, especially when we work in the universities. But I would also call myself as an activist, and I'm also active in the political party. It was very long so that it was said that the artists are political and that art is political, but you should stay very far from the political parties. But I don't think that it goes like that anymore. The borders between how you live your life, where are you active, how you want to make part in the society, I don't see the reason for making these limits that where artists could participate and how. And I was invited here to talk about craftivism, and especially craftivism in the Arctic. And craftivism is kind of activism through craft, and the similar concept is the artivism, activism through art. And this is such only a Google image search for what kind of processes there are going on that people simply associate with craftivism. So craft-based actions that somehow take place in public space and try to have some kind of influence in the society, and very often talking about issues that are important for the people, such as nature, women's rights, care. It could be anything, our histories and our sorrows. And activism is defined as a strong action on a controversial issue. Whether not every art is a strong action, this is something that we can, it depends also on who is looking at it and who is defining it. And having influence in a community or in a society has come to be part of the contemporary art very strongly since 60s and 70s. At that time, the artists wanted to get rid of the idea of art as something that is inside an institution, in an empty gallery space, or, for example, a statue that shows the president or somebody else who holds the power as a statue. This was called public art, and in 60s and 70s it was remade into new genre public art that was based on people and their encounters. So there are many artists who worked as a community artists or somehow socially engaged artists whose artistic practice involves working with people and highlighting political issues or socio-political situations. It's then been asked that, is it art? For many decades already, and it can be also asked that, is it local and is it meaningful for local people? within the community art, it's often says that most important is to make art that is meaningful for the communities. But the contemporary art field itself is very international. Artists work so that they travel, they present their work in another countries, and their work is international. But often it is anyway said that the strongest community art is locally based. It is meaningful for some people who participated and who can, to whom the topic of the art is speaking because of its importance in the local connection. You all must know this artist Britta Marakatlappa and her work, and I think that it is up to us to consider that is it also craftivism, is it also activism? It's a strong action on behalf of controversial issues such as the continuation of the culture and remaking the tradition for the contemporary society and for the art world and for the local communities as well. I am experiencing it as craftivism as well. When I come from the university, I am involved with the concept of Arctic art. So this refers to circumpolar Arctic, Nordic countries, Greenland, Iceland, Canada, Russian Arctic, and to indigenous art and non-indigenous art in this field. And the similarities and the blendings of indigenous and other than indigenous art. This concept has a strong base in indigenous cultures in a way of how making art is part of the life. It's a way of living. You collect the materials out from the nature, you live with it, you live the process, and whether the process or the product is the art is not important to ask. And this kind of not making the difference between the process and product is something that unites many of the artistic practices in the Arctic. Whether it is contemporary art, design, craft, or something popular culture, or some new forms of culture, such as, like, for example, snow and ice sculpting, also isn't important when talking about the Arctic art. More it's about what it is about. It's about the Arctic topics and issues that are important here in the Arctic, about the Arctic sustainability. So talking about the Arctic art is culture political action as well. It draws attention on what is important in this region for our culture, for our continuation. And an example of Arctic art as a snow sculpting. It comes outside of the field of contemporary art. It is something that has importance to local people. It's art, and we also can say it's Arctic art education while we are working with the community members. So the pedagogical turn in the contemporary art also takes place in this kind of practices, where artists are working with community members to make snow sculpting, for example. To me, it's also craft. The working with materials is one way of crafting. And the connection to design as a process where you also handle the materials and so on. Within the Arctic art and design, the dualism from separating the craft and design is not followed, as it has happened in the Western art and design education. For example, at schools, like educational institutions, crafts is taught in some schools, design is other school, and arts in another school. So the Arctic art is bringing the fields together and also educating artists that are not following this dualistic separation of these fields. And is it for sustainability or for sustainable development? The sustainability is often understood as something that we need to sustain, that we must not change because we have to sustain something what we have. And partly it is true, we have valuable cultures, but they are not weak. They are not weak that they would need the protection, but of course they need to be supported to continue and to go from one generation to another. And sustainable development is often associated with development that is brought from elsewhere into the Arctic and often understood as oil industries, forest industries, so on. Do we want to promote this kind of development as a change? It is, as you see, it is not easy to say, but within my thinking, I don't think that the traditions itself are sustainable. It is a constant negotiation. What is sustainable? What is a sustainable future? And how we need to change, and in what kind of arts and activities we can promote the more sustainable future. And often it is then like somehow turning back to the economical sustainability if we want to sustain the cultures and cultural continuation. This should not be done either because our cultures in the Arctic, very often in kind of isolated locations, also need the economic sustainability to continue. But arts and crafts they also have economic importance, and this is something that we should understand better to promote the sustainability in the Arctic regions, in the locations that are physically far away from some of the centers. And I have some examples of my own practice. This is a very old example, but since I have been working again with the topic of trees, I thought that I present this one. So this is a crocheted trees presented on the dining tables, and this was about the climate change and about the activists who wanted to make change by what they eat. So I interviewed vegans and vegetarians and people who wanted to find their food from the trash bins. And you could listen as an audience of this installation, these interviews where people told that how they want to influence and what kind of actions they make through what they eat in this installation. So there were like recorders, and from those polls you could listen to talk. As an installation, this was very clearly about the climate crisis, also about the forest. So I had to do names for the installation, the dining tables and the earth lungs. And making the installation is a way of thinking, that you have the time for making your craft and think about the controversial issues and try to form your own opinion on it. And recently I have been again working with the topic of trees and forests, and in Finland this is a highly controversial issue, and it is very difficult for people to follow that what the scientists are saying, who is speaking the truth, and what powers are impacting on their opinions. It is lack of the biodiversity in the forests, it is the question of how much forest can be cut down yearly and where, and if we should be worried for the fact that really species in Finland, like birds, for example, are under threat to disappear, and if we should be worried of the forests as carbon sinks. And then there are researchers who say that, well, you need to cut the forest so that the new forest will grow, and this will get the carbon from the air. And other researchers saying that no ways, that we should protect the forest so that they would be the carbon sinks and so on. And it is a media discussion. It goes on the social media when people constantly report from the old forest that are cut down, and from their sorrow and from their worries. And for just anybody in Finland, it is difficult to know what you should think about this thing. And I was making then an art installation about that. So for me, the way of making the craft-based work is a way of having time to think about the controversial issue. And this one is a knitted installation. It is like a boxing, what you hit. And it has patterns, and it has patterns from many countries. So from the Baltic knitting patterns, from the Nordic ones, from somewhere from Scotland and Shetland. And this is one continuation in my craft-based installation art, that I am interested of the craft as a language, that what kind of language are the patterns and how do you read it? Because the people who know knitting and knitting patterns, they can recognize that, okay, this pattern is Baltic and this one comes from this and this region. So people with a different knowledge read different levels from here. And craftivism or activism in contemporary art is always multi-layered as the art is. It doesn't have one story. It doesn't tell only one side of the controversial issue, but it speaks to people with what is their own cultural background and locality, for example. And in this one, I tried to present on one hand the forest conflicts as a battle that you follow like it would happen in a TV show, although on the other hand, it is something very important to every Finn. Finland associate themselves as a country of thousands of forests and thousands of lakes, but forests are cut down all the time, and many people think that far too much. Why I wanted to have the patterns in many different places is to communicate that this is a local topic, but this is also a universal topic, and it is a cross-cultural topic. That also the connection that people have to trees is not specific only to Finns, but the similar forest spirits or the ways of having the spiritual communication with trees is, for example, something that goes on in many countries and cultures. And this is the part of the installation, the gloves with some stickers of the parties of the conflict. And the same installation, I remade it into the forest with the new title as well, where then more people could see it, because I work in Lapland where the audience is quite limited, but this one was shown in southern Finland. And today for this talk I was wondering that if craftivism is always like only or limited to material. And I think that of course the material is at the core of the craft, and craft as a form, as it is this bodily making of it. But I think that kind of craftivism also happens through the online, like for example, you might be making drawing and this would end up as an animation. So the shift between that, what if the craftivism can be also done digitally, I don't think that it is clear at all. More it is that it has some kind of material sense as well. And this is another recent work of mine about trees. So we had like a community art workshops to encounter trees, and we formed the guidelines that how do you, for example, how do you meet the tree, how do you talk to a tree, how do you form a relation with tree. And these guidelines that we experimented in the workshops were then presented as a guideline in this installation that is a posters on the wall, but also with the cards. And these cards were shared away in the exhibition so that the visitor could have a card, take it at home, and read the guideline and practice it itself. So this kind of participatory art, the different methods for involving people into different parts of the process of either making the art, and whether the art already happened in the forests or it happened in the moment when a visitor had the card and went to the forest. It's not so important. The art is somewhere there. But the participatory methods in the art are clearly part of this way of art being activist. Some of the guidelines were more straightforward, telling that do this and try out this, and some were more poetic. So environmental topics are important to me, and I work with the sustainability related to nature. But also I do activist art about the heritage, cultural heritage, and what is our craft traditions. And one of the craft traditions in Finland is this decoration of, it's called himmeli, himmel in Swedish. So a decoration that is made and presented on the top of the dining table at Christmas time. And it is traditionally made from a rice straw. And it's like a Christmas decoration. And in one moment in Finland, the True Finns, which is the political party that wants to not to have immigration in Finland and so on, said that the government should support only art that is nationalistic, that promotes the nationalistic values and continues the kind of like the nationalistic story of the Finnish art. And that was defined in their cultural policies, and that made me to think of this, how the cultures are all the time in a dialogue, and how the cultures develop when the artists travel and meet other artists and learn from the others, as the same way as happened in the crafts. And I looked at the background of this title of this decoration, himmel, that it comes from Sweden and from German, and it had the history in a German culture as some kind of decoration times ago. And then I wanted to remake the tradition and communicate how something that is valuable on the Finnish country, that we think as very, very Finnish, actually is formed in an interaction with other cultures. And I've been doing these kind of works where the community members are invited to craft with me in many, many ways, and also here in the Himmeli. So actually there is 3 generations working together. And some of my own, so I then made like a contemporary forms by twisting a little bit the traditional geometric form of the himmeli, and some also from the plastic straw that totally expanded the scale and the forms of the traditional decoration. And another example of revitalizing the traditional and the cultural heritage. So this, the works that I present now have two traditions to revitalize. The hand dyeing, so that you have the wool and you want to make it colored, so you pick up mushrooms and plants and make the hand-dyed wool. So that is the one tradition that also has local, like a strong local connection, so that it depends on where you live and what mushrooms and plants you have, how you do it. And me and my colleague Elina Härkönen have been doing these installations, or different kind of installations from hand-dyed wool for a long time. Elina is the one who is making the wool yarns mainly, and I'm then thinking that how do we present them in the installation art and so on, and also been making these with people. And a string art tradition in Finland normally is, if I think back to my childhood and my grandma's house, there would have been a string art that was like a geometric shape, like a flower, a small black plywood piece with the tiny nails and a wool in it, or yarn. And why I think that it is important to revitalize the culture is that because our life is in constant change. The environment is changing. For example, the climate crisis is changing the nature, and people are losing many of the ways of life when there are so fast changes in the nature. And also due to the globalization and urbanization, that many of the traditions are at the risk to disappear. But the continuation of them is important for people knowing their roots and knowing their traditions and giving value to them. And while I come from Rovaniemi, I come from this group of people who were born in Lapland but don't have very strong cultural identity. We are not Sami people, we are not very much appreciated in the south. There are many people who ask, who are we and what is our culture? Were we the ones who colonized, and should we even be here? And what is our tradition and heritage? So looking back to this kind of traditions, that okay, what did my mom do, what did my grandma do, is a way of highlighting the value of our own heritage. So the himmeli making, for example, I learned it from my mom when I was small, so did I the knitting. And the experience that it is something that I have learned from my mom, from my grandmom, that is the core of the craftivism for me. And the aspect of whose culture it is one of the topics that I have been interested to appreciate the fact that we learn from the others and that our cultures are blending. And when working as an artist in Lapland, this is a culture politically charged concept, when there are many cultures who feel the need to protect that this is our culture and this belongs only to us, for example. So then the topic to talk about the blendings of the culture is a controversial issue as well. Maybe not important to many, but to some anyways. So in this installation we invited people to knit these patterns and give us the pieces, and we collected them together. As a conclusion, what I would say what craftivism is, it's participatory, it's public, it's presented publicly, either in the galleries or art museums or in the streets. It definitely is material. It highlights the value of our senses and our relations to material in the expressions. But it is also conceptual. the craft as a language and the topics that are communicated to the craft is definitely very conceptual as well. I think that it can be digital as well. The way of artists combining something that is material and how it is expressed and shared digitally, for example, that is not the core of defining what is craft and what is not. And I would say that it promotes the change, but also the continuation of the traditional values. There is a constant negotiation of sustaining something from our heritage and remaking and renewing it. And I have been also writing something of these topics if somebody is interested to read further. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be here and talk with any of you later more.